Hi everybody, I just wanted to record a quick video to talk a little bit more about percentiles, do a few examples, and to talk about quartiles and how to create a box plot and how to read box plots. So remember from class we defined the kth percentile to be the score below which we find k% of our scores in our sample. Alright, so we want to be able to do two things. For a given score, we want to be able to figure out what percentile is associated to that score. And we also want to go the other direction. So given a certain percentile, we want to associate a data value to that or a score to that given percentile. Right? I want to start with the first direction. Right? Given a score, how do we determine a percentile associated to that score? It's important to note that percentiles are always with respect to a fixed sample. All right? So in our case, we're going to work with the sample 1, 3.4, 3, 5, etc. This is showing up on your screen right now. And what we want to know is, for the specific score of 6, what percentile can we associate to this? Right? So the percentile of the score 6 is easy enough to compute. All right? Given the definition, all we need to do is find out how many scores in our sample, right, are below 6. So we have xi strictly less than 6, and then we want to divide by the total number of scores in our sample. So we first want to determine the numerator. We need to know how many scores in the sample, or the numbers in white, are strictly below 6. So we can just kind of highlight them quickly. All right, it seems like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scores in the sample that are strictly less than 6. All right. So in the top we would put a 7. Finally, we need to count the total number of scores that are in the sample. So the total number recorded in between our braces here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. So we get 0.7, which we then convert to a percent. So this is 70%. So the percentile of 6 is the 70th percentile. Right? Let's do one more quick example. Suppose we want to figure out what's the percentile of the score 5. All right. Remember, we compute this by computing how many scores appearing in our sample, so this is the list in white, are strictly less than 5, divided by the total number of scores that appear in the sample. All right. So in this case, the number of scores less than 5, we can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We would have 6 out of the 10 total observations in the fixed white sample. We get 0.6. When we convert this to a percent, this is 60%. So the percentile associated to 5 is the 60th percentile. Next, I want to show you how to convert from a percentile to a score. All right, so what score would be associated to the 30th percentile? What score would be associated to the 50th percentile, or the median? And just like with the median, the first thing you need to do is take the sample that you were given and sort it into a list that starts from the smallest element and goes out to the largest element. So what we did is we took our original sample and then we just rewrote it so that all the measurements are present, but now they're in ascending order. So we start with 1, 1.2, 2.4, etc., etc. So let's consider a specific example. Suppose we want to use this sample which we've sorted. We want to find the 35th percentile score for this sample. All right, so of course the first step is going to be to sort, and we've already done this step. So I'm going to put this off to the side. Our next step is to compute L, which you can think of as where along the list should this score occur. So the way you compute L is you take your percentile number, you divide by 100, and then you multiply by the number of elements in the sample, right? So in our case, we know that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 elements in the sample. So when we compute L, we would take 0.35, right, 35 over 100, times 10. So our L value would be 3.5. All right, so this is what we'll call the computed L value. So our L value that we just computed was 3.5. Now, this is roughly where in the list you should occur. Our convention in the textbook is that if the computed L value is not a whole number, so in other words, we have some little bit of fractional part, we round up, always rounding up. So our chosen L value is going to be 4. And now this gives us the location in the list for our 35th percentile. All right, so L is short for location, essentially. So we would start with the first element, second, third, fourth. So our 35th percentile for this particular sample is 3. So working through the steps, again, the first thing we always do is sort. Our next step, 2, is to find our computed L value. So in generality, it takes K, which is the percentile we're trying to find. It divides by 100, and then it multiplies by the number of elements in our sample. Our next step in this process is to ask ourselves a question. Is L that we just computed a whole number? Now, depending on our answer to this, we're going to compute the percentile in different ways. If the answer is no, then we round up to create a new L value that is a whole number. All right, so in our previous example, our computed L value was 3.5, so we considered an L value of 4. All right, now this, as we stated in the last part, ends up being our location. So that's how many, that's the element in the sorted list that we want to circle. That becomes our percentile. Now, if the answer to that question is yes, then the percentile score is the average, or the mean, of the Lth element of the list and the L plus 1, or the L plus first element of the list. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do this by way of example. Suppose we want to find the 10th percentile for this sample. So we'd start by sorting the sample, which we've already done. Our next step would be to compute an L value. So we would take, since we're doing the 10th percentile, we'd take 10 divided by 100. And we'd multiply this by 10. which is the number of elements in our sample, and we end up with 1. So our computed L value is a whole number. So L equaling 1 is a whole number. So if L is 1, L plus 1 is equal to 2. Right? So our to find the 10th percentile, we find the mean of the first and second score in our sample. All right? The first because of the original L value, the second in our sample because of L plus 1. So we find the mean of these two. So we're going to take a little bit of extra space here so I can find the mean. All right, so our first element is here, it's 1. Our second element in the sorted list is 1.2. So we would add these together and divide by 2 to find their mean. So we would get 2.2 divided by 2. This is 1.1. So 1.1 would be considered our 10th percentile for this sample. So to answer this problem, we would say the score of 1.1 is the 10th percentile, or corresponds to the 10th percentile. All right. So again, let's just go over these steps. All right. The first step is always to sort the sample that you're working with. Next, we compute an L value, where we take the percentile we're interested in divided by 100 times n, which is the number of observations in our sample. Then we could head in one or two directions here, depending on whether that L we just computed is a whole number. If it's not a whole number, we round up. We create a new L, and then that gives us the location of the kth percentile. If it does happen to be a whole number, then we compute L and L plus 1, or we keep L and we compute L plus 1, and we average these two numbers that appear in our sorted list. All right, let's do one more example. So here's a new data set, 3, 4.1, 2, 3, 6, etc. And what we want to do is find the 75th percentile for this sample. All right, so our first step is, of course, to sort our data, which I've done below. Our second step is to compute our L value. All right, so L in this case is going to be the 75 coming from the percentile we want to compute, divided by 100, and then multiplied by the number of elements in our sample. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our computed L value ends up equaling 6. So with an L value of 6, we check, is this a whole number? It is a whole number. So we look at L and L plus 1. L plus 1 is, of course, 7. So we want to find the mean of the 6th and 7th scores in the sorted list. All right, so we count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th score is a 5. The 7th score is a 6. And then we divide by 2, so this is 11 over 2. Right? So our 75th percentile for this data set is 5.5. Right? Just for your own reference, the book has a really good visualization of the process for finding the percentile score for a sample. It's on page 116 in the book. I recommend that you take a look. It's a nice way to visualize it. Just a couple of other quick notes. It becomes kind of tedious to write the 25th percentile. So the book uses the following shorthand. I'll use the same. If you have a big P and then a 25, this refers to the 25th percentile. In general, PK is the notation for the kth percentile. Another thing I want to point out is you don't necessarily want to know all of the percentiles, but there are some that people place importance with. We call these actually the quartiles. So the first quartile just corresponds to the 25th percentile, right? So the notation for the first quartile is usually a Q1, but we know it's going to be exactly equivalent to P25. So the first quartile is the 25th percentile. The second quartile is the same thing as the 50th percentile, or the median, and the third quartile is the 75th percentile. Right? So it's important to know these as well. Right? Oftentimes what you'll find is in statistical reporting, rather than giving all the different percentiles, they just report the 3 quartiles. I also want to point out that even though Excel does have functions for computing percentiles and quartiles, I think one example looks like percentile.exe. Right? These will not give you the same values as the process given in the book. There's a little bit of variability in the ways that you can compute percentiles, so make sure that you follow the book. All right, that's the important part. Those are the percentiles that we're going to want to work, or that we're going to want to use. All right, so follow the book just for consistency. All right, thanks.